Hey guys, this is Honeytrapper, the attacker strikes back, and yes, it wasn't obvious, it is a Star Wars reference. So a quick who am I? I'm Dónnan, by the way. I'm a CTI analyst at Mallon. I've been interested in all things forensics and TI, ironically. I like getting involved kind of in this cyber community, like, doing talks and attending conferences and stuff, and just a bit of movie buff as well. The agenda for today is kind of broken down into a few things. So a recap, like kind of what honeypots are, for those who are familiar with it, or need kind of a refresher. The attacker strikes back, so, when honeypots maybe get abused for nefarious purposes. And when the good guys wins, it's not always all negative. There's some benefits to honeypots having it. And then Mario. Probably some people read this and thought, what's Mario got to do with this? Well, you're going to find out. And finally, the rules of deception, which is kind of going into how deception is pretty much the foundations of a honeypot. So, a quick recap. So, what's a honeypot? So, firstly, it's not honey, but it's a honeypot. Realistically, a honeypot is kind of like a bait, slash a lure to draw attackers in. So it's kind of like a deception tool used for detection purposes. So it's meant to mimic something that you would think, this looks real. It's not, but the attacker doesn't know that. So it's designed to be attacked, compromised, and you name it, on purpose. Depending on, of course, what the type, which I'll go into in later slides. It's separated three primary types. So you got your honey token, which is your typical data piece. So Word document, Excel sheet with passwords in it, but it's not passwords. Honey service, so it's mimicking the service of SSH, FTP, and you name it. And then honey systems kind of mimicking the operating system, so it's like a Linux or Windows, you name it all. And then there's different levels into activity, so you got low and high. So low is typically your kind of detection purposes, whereas high is more there's a bit more of a risk where it draws a lot more attention to the attacker side of it, where it's meant to mimic all kind of the internals of what an operating system is, from the ground up. Whereas low is kind of just meant to be not really mimicking too much of what an operating system is, and more just your tokens and services as we bit. So. This kind of is just a wee diagram, just kind of show you how honeypots work. So you can see there's two different types of honeypots. So one's external facing, that's kind of research based. So these are the ones that are kind of a bit risky if you want to have inside your network, because these are the ones that have all the ports exposed. The attacker doesn't notice because they're, everything gets scanned in there every second and every day. So when they start seeing something get exposed, we'll start probing it, attacking it. And particularly from an intelligence person like myself, this is valuable because you can start to see exactly what your attacker is doing, what exploits they're trying to throw up, and I kind of build a profile of what are they trying to gain, and especially geolocations, because you can get dozens of IPs you're probably firing at it. And this is our low interactivity, so this is kind of an endpoint, a machine with a honeypot on it, containing files that might mimic certain pieces of information. So this is more for detection purposes. So if the attacker's going around probing things or somehow breach initial access to your network, and you come across a honeypot, even by the time they realize it's a honeypot, it's too late. You've detected them. You're cool, they're there. You can put them out. With high interactivity as well, it is a bit of a risk because you are basically letting them compromise things left, right, and center, but I'll go into that in a bit more detail and why that's a big risk. Okay, so the attacker strikes back. So this is kind of really where honeypots kind of are a bit of a downfall. So the attacker gains upper hand, so kind of it's separated into a few pieces. So placement of honeypots in your network can lead to poor consequences. So again, we've seen the last diagram about where it's being stuck on. And placement-wise, it might be poor. It's you don't want to sit it right beside the main controller for obvious reasons. Because otherwise, you're letting the attacker pretty much get closer to the keys of the kingdom. When the deception games fails, this director will be hard to track their movements. So, if you feel that if you feel to deceive the attacker, or they might know it's a honeypot, then they won't bother and just go on. It's going to prove difficult for you when you're trying to actually detect them. And then, when honeypots aren't configured right, we can leverage lateral limit. This kind of goes more for higher interactivity honeypots, mainly because it's the attack surface is quite large. And this kind of goes when, particularly without anything, you need to make sure it's like an isolated environment. So for those that dealt with malware, that if you're running things in a sandbox, you need to make sure it's isolated so things don't escape through memory or the network. Same thing with honeypots. It's you need to make sure it's isolated enough. If it's not, then the attacker can realize oh cool, I can use this and actually climb up the chain, and then you're basically screwed. And then as a result of that, sensitive files might be exposed. Depending on where you might have actually sent actual files in your honeypot. When you're meant to mimic it, you put fake data. That can happen. And then as a result, you just give them better ways of actual treatment. So kind of the risks of further risks of honeypots. Identifying the honeypots being untouched. Again, the attacker will be just realize oh, it's a honeypot because it's poorly configured, or not poorly configured. The deception of it is kind of just this is clearly a honeypot. It's you're setting a trap up for someone in a jungle. Clearly you put a big neon sign saying spike trap. I'm they're not going to really fall for the spike trap, right? Pointless. Detection might always work. It's true. It's again. I wouldn't say honeypots are the only line of defense you should have. Should always pair it up with an ADR or something. I've been times where it kind of draws on the third point where scanners, vulnerability scanners, or penetration tests can kick off honeypots, which is always kind of why you need to kind of add the IP of the machine stuff to known addresses. That way things don't get picked up. But because from a SOC perspective, I used to work in one, you start to see things where honeypots get flagged all the time because scanners really to kick it off. But they're dormant machines nowadays, so they are working as they should be, but for the wrong reasons. And in this kind of leads last point, the attacker creates Swift cracks. So once a honeypot's been fingerprinted, the attacker can literally just create fake exploits to divert from the actual exploit that's taking place, and then you're even more screwed because then you're trying to focus your attention on something that's actually not a threat to something that's actually threatening your backdoor. Same way with a DDoS attack sometimes. Sometimes attackers will use it as a smoke screen because everything's down, and then they'll do things in the background and you're not paying attention. And similar concept there. So it's not all bad. You get one of the good guys win. So there's a lot of positives to honeypots as well. Not entire negatives. So here's another thing. So waste time resources. So kind of going back to the high interactivity honeypot that we've seen in the diagram, that's actually a good way of using resource exhaustion. So, again, attackers have limited resources depending on who you're dealing with. Compared to APT, you're kind of screwed there. But, honeypots can just drain the resources left, right, and center. And then, at that point, they don't have a lot to throw back afterwards. And the resources are 12 times, so how long they're actually there within the network or this and that. If they're picked up really fast, then they've kind of lost that game a wee bit. And then provides another line of defense and detection. So again, it adds that extra line of detection for you when you need a bit more visibility within your network. Because organizations hire out MSSPs because there's too much to kind of handle on their own. They need extra help. Honeypots are kind of like that too. And again, providing intelligence, like went over earlier, it's a good way of for an intelligence analyst like myself to kind of understand, what your threat landscape is. Who's your what's the kind of audience? Is it largely coming from Iran or China or Russia or USA, for example? What's kind of the general geolocation? And yeah. So moving on to that there, you might be wondering what's this got to do with Chris Pratt? It's not. He did play Mario, but yeah, in all seriousness, Mario. What do you think this has got to do with Mario? Well, when I started thinking about this talk, I was since it was a bit of plant themed, I was oh, Mario's actually got something to do with it. And funny enough, it's actually on your badges there. So quick disclaimer, and I know probably Nintendo won't care, but there's such things as Nintendo ninjas. They like to the copyright strike things that might mention their products and stuff. just in case this does get flagged. They all own the stuff. So yeah, that's just a quick disclaimer. So cool. So we've all played Mario, like majority of us probably have or know who it is. And we're all familiar with what the warp pipe is. So the thing that you can traverse different worlds back and forth, and sometimes jump over, right? So, and we're all familiar with the piranha plant, or this guy's called PD. And when you get those two together, you get the piranha plant and the warp pipe. So this is kind of the funny thing where I thought that's a honeypot because it's about deception. You don't know the warp pipe you're about to jump over is real or not. Honeypots are kind of the same thing. So they're trying to mimic something that you think this looks like a password file. It's not, and you've pretty much been screwed. So same way with in honeypots, the piranha plant's pretty much a good way of saying, yeah, you're screwed. As respect. And, further, kind of adding to the further plant theme of these sites, and we thought, well, a Venus flytrap's also a honeypot, because, it pretends to be something that it's not. Insects and stuff don't know that. We all know it's clearly a carnivorous plant. But, by the time they land on that there, it's too late, they've been trapped, squashed, and, yeah. And, you also got, further carnivorous plants, like this one here, where it acts kind of as a water, a food source as well. Traps in insects there too. And, yeah. You got two other real-life honeypots right there. So, yeah. So kind of adding further on to that. So we got the rules of deception. So we're all familiar with this big horse here. Oh, God. They look a lot better on my slides. So we're all familiar with the Trojan horse. Homer's affiliate, Greek snuck into a wooden horse, giving a gift offering to the city of Troy, and the Greeks snuck out and ransack and pretty much turn the city upside down. But they don't know that, and that's where deception really plays. Funny enough, this is a really good example of very much just how deception really works. So, you might be thinking to yourselves, how does deception really work? So. This was kind of an outcome when I've been kind of researching part 3 with honeypots since I've been in learning about them, by Chris Sanders. Highly recommend reading it. This kind of gives a framework from Barton Whaley from the 1980s. So he kind of developed this idea of deception from showing hiding the real and then showing the false. So the idea is to show that you want to make them think that they have something they have and they don't, and then hiding what it actually is. And that's the core fundamentals of what a honeypot is. Because at the end of the day, even we're talking about what attackers do, how they leverage it and use it. Deception at its core is literally what the honeypot needs to do in order to actually work. Deception fails, then the honeypot is useless. It's the whole idea is is either to distract the attacker, use the resources up, detect them, or gather intelligence. It needs to work in order for you to make sure you're not being compromised as a company. At the end of the day, the idea of deception is that you have to believe that the target has the advantage, and then when in fact you're 2 steps ahead. So it's like playing a game of 4D chess. You know that your moves before the opponent does. So kind of further breaking down on this about hiding. So, hiding is when specific features are hidden, particularly within a honeypot. So this kind of mainly serves as a detection purpose. These are further down the three parts. So masking, this kind of involves reality being hidden by blending in with the background. So the overall goal of invisibility, or is deceived to something, know that something is there. And repackaging, so that occurs when reality is hidden by new wrapping. So this differs from masking, as the goal is for deceived from knowing something, when in fact it's not actually knowing its full nature. So again, it clearly can see something there, but you don't know the actual intention of it. And, finally, dazzling. So this kind of can be encryption or obfuscation, the idea of hiding, dazzling is, when the qualities of a known object can change to kind of actually what it actually fully is. So we're all familiar with obfuscation, attackers use it as a good way of trying to hide what they're doing, hindrance for researchers, but more so that we know that way they're trying to clear up their tracks more for evasive purposes. And this is usually more as a last resort, compare until the either two other options fail or more as a backup. And but showing, so this is kind of the opposite to hiding. The goal for honeypots is to show something to the attacker to interact with, fine with. Interaction's a big thing. Like again, low and high interactivity, interaction needs to work in order for detection to work. And, so that you'll be able to properly lure them in. So, firstly, mimicking, involves, selecting the characters in another reality and creating a carbon copy of it, mimics, what it actually is. Inventing, so the creation of an alternate reality rather than mimicking an existing one. Good way of that there, it was a Trojan horse. They believed that it was a gift, when in actual fact, we all know it was not. And it was a good way of sneaking them in. It worked, for the Greeks' advantage. And then, finally, decoying. So, the method of distraction, enticement, or deterrent to misdirect someone away from something else. So, and kind of another good deception framework was see, do, and think. So, this is kind of a military strategy they typically use, but this is more further built on honeypots themselves for deception. So, so the attacker needs to see system services, whatever, on the honeypot. And so that way they know that it's actually real. Previously, when I was talking about honeypots, I've developed one with Calorie. So that's kind of like an open source honeypot where you can mimic the likes of a Finnic file system on Linux. It was very basic, but I showed what Calorie can log everything the attacker's doing, if they're trying to create files or run exploits, you name it. But at the end of the day, deception only works until when you look at something that clearly this is a real file structure. Otherwise, if you're putting in fake data, it's clearly fake. It's not going to work. So the attacker must think that the honey system, service, or token is worth any value. So you need to present it in a way to make sure that it's actually value of it. So that goes for placement and stuff. Where is it actually placed nearby? That might clearly indicate this looks kind of valuable. From an outside perspective. To also add though, you've also got insider threats as well. So they're also a threat as much as external attackers. So you need to make sure when you're putting these things in, X amount of people know about where they actually are instead of everybody, because that might end up triggering false positives like we went over earlier. And then the attacker must do something that creates an interaction with the honeypot. So interaction is just everything. Needs to make sure that it's interacting with it. And yeah, that's just anything. But as the wise words of an admiral once said, once your target is tracked. It didn't play. Oh. Well, he says it's a trap, so, yeah. But, yeah. That kind of wraps it up. Oh, yeah. Thanks, guys. There's some free resources there. So that's the book that I largely kind of got inspired by. That book right there, The Cuckoo's Egg, from Crystal, he kind of was one of the first pioneers of honeypots, and it's kind of a famous known thing about how he seen unusual activity one day when I was working in the school network and developed what was known to become a honeypot. And then this QR code here is just kind of a list of open source honeypots. I swear it's not trying to fish you or whatever. So just in case, it's paranoid. But yeah. Any questions? Yeah. I couldn't tell you. I'm not incredibly averse to every single honeypot there is. I mean, that does, I believe that GitHub does actually detail, what's all the different types of honeypots, research purposes and stuff, if you want to have a look at it. I couldn't really recommend it one, because there's just so many variations of them, to be honest. So, yeah.
There's a good one to start with, to play with a lot of them. They come pre-configured. It's ACHD. It's by Black Hills Information Security. And you don't want to deploy it. You want to put it on a VM, and then it's got a lot of the honeypots that you can find on the list, but they're all ready to set up with testing and sample scripts, and you can do it right there on the VM.
To also add to that as well, Shodan does actually list like every pretty much publicly like honeypot out there because they're all exposed. They are like out there as well. So there's usually some kind of lot of like a maps where like there's usually like a lot of honeypot activity resides. And I believe America is kind of like the largest amount of honeypots exposed to the web. But yeah, I think it's more for the purpose of trying to make sure like when you see something there, you know it's a honeypot. Any other questions? Yes.
How would you make it look like a real network, whilst also one of the real users going into
Stack. Making sure that they, let's say you trained in it because then it defeats the purpose of honeypot when it comes in cyber threats. You know, if you're teaching everyone like, oh, don't touch this as a honeypot, you know, if someone decides to become disgruntled or whatever, you know, you've ruined kind of the deception tool. So it's more making sure like I think it's from the side of more when you're setting these up to make sure that it's in a place where the users shouldn't typically interact with or have permissions that kind of go to. So, you know, making sure it's isolated well enough as well to kind of go to that. But then again, it's like, it sometimes might be inevitable because there is the false positive side of it. Like I went over like with vulnerability scanners and stuff. Some users may end up accidentally going to one, you know, without realizing, or there might be some like...
If somebody triggers your corporate honeypot, it's because they're browsing the net. Why are browsing the net?
Yeah, true.
That's a conversation. So, like I've had a few times. So why were you randomly browsing around my corporate network?
Nothing ridiculous,
Yes.
So, when you use one of these services to run, say you have some, I don't know, service like this, running this mock API, or exposes some API. Is that sort of using a mock API or is it actually executing that service?
I believe it's a mock API. I know you can actually. I think it's Canary is like a good one. Not to like sales pitch for them, but I'm a personally been interacting with them in my career as well. They actually have like a site open source, I believe. That actually you can mess around with APIs and stuff and whatever for tokens and stuff for purposes like that there. So yeah, you can mimic it to be like it's like a real API and stuff. I believe. Hopefully first in it, but I believe you can mimic it. So. Any other questions?
A round of applause for it. Is that a new blind or are you?
I'm really blinded.
No, that's the question.